Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. This is the France 24 debate. We're reacting to the 5-year sentence in the Oscar Pistorius trial, one that gripped not only South Africa, but the whole world. With us to talk about it, Margie, president of the South African branch of the prestigious worldwide writers club, the Pen Club. Her latest novel, Water Music. Thank you for being with us from Cape Town here in the studio. Paris-based rapper and DJ Mo LAUDI, who told us in part one that he was attended, but not at the same time, the same school as Oscar Pistorius. And
unfortunately,
what's that?
Unfortunately,
but when you were growing up, probably, or when he first rose to fame, it wasn't unfortunate.
Of course, it was quite a proud moment for most South Africans, and to be able to say yes, he comes from a same school that I went to. It was quite something to talk about. And it's fascinating because at the beginning he brought all South Africans together. People were not even watching the Paralympics, and then all of a sudden he started winning and people start cheering and the whole country gets united and rally behind him. And now it's tend to be the opposite, because it shows the cracks and of how society is divided between the black and the white and the rich and the poor, male and female.
How much we read into our sporting icons is a topic we can perhaps broach as well a little bit later on with the rest of our panel. I want to introduce them. Pauline of the spokesperson for Oser le Féminisme, Dare to be a Feminist, the French organization, and attorney Fabian Hincker. Before the break, Margie Orford was talking about how having cameras in the courtroom for this trial perhaps changed views on the justice system in South Africa. There are no cameras in the court here in France. What do you think about that?
Well, for sure, there is some kind of global background of public opinion pressure that can be put.
You're against, I can see.
Because of the camera. I'm not against. I think it has some positive aspect because case law shall be something public. But of course, it can influence. But we cannot go against evolution of technology. You know, now we are mass media, public opinion through internet, through everything. It's interesting the Twitter you mentioned earlier. What if he was not so famous? What if he was not? What would have been the sentence? So maybe it can influence, but I don't think it has some bad influence. I think it's something positive to show to the people what's going on in the courts.
All right, and you mentioned reactions. We're getting a lot of them. One from Nadia on Twitter. Violent crime is something we see every day in South Africa. However, we have to remain calm and act like a reasonable person would. Would you say, Margie Orford, that South Africa is different because of this trial?
It is different in some ways. I was hesitant, as the previous speaker was, about the presence of cameras in the court. It's the first time a trial has been televised. But I must say that the example of having a court case fully televised has actually been a very positive one. And interestingly enough, to have it tweeted has been very useful. I mean, the old idea was that anybody could attend a court. We now have such large societies that, for me, making it public through the internet or through technology is simply the same principle, just wider. I think it really did allay people's fears about Pistorius getting different treatment because he was white. I think that's less clear cut as perhaps people make out to be. What I think would be wonderful is if all our trials were televised, because many people don't get good treatment and the treatment that they are entitled to. So I think with the televising, it's been very useful. Pistorius has been adept at playing the media. I mean, we saw that amazing performance of his, of grief and vomiting into that green bucket endlessly, which I think did nothing but show that he wasn't really an Olympic hero. He was a man when the chips were down.
Wait, you're saying playing the media. Are you suggesting that there was a bit of stage acting in there?
I don't know if it was stage acting, but for me, that was the moment in which he could have been a tragic hero like King Lear or Oedipus or one of those great heroes who has been culpable and then owns up to his act, and says, yes, this is what I did. I didn't intend it if that was the truth, but I take the consequences. I found that an extremely unheroic spectacle. I wouldn't quite go to calling it a performance. They denied that he'd had any coaching or anything. But that spectacle was not something that I think endeared him to the audience who loved him. It was not very courageous. It was not very brave. It was as though he couldn't own up to what he was had done. He couldn't take the consequences of what his actions had led to, which to me was a trope throughout the trial of him constantly being presented as the victim, as constantly, you know, this refrain that Oscar Pistorius has lost everything. He's lost what his defense called his love relationship. They never called it Reena Steenkamp. To me, it was entirely through his own actions. So there was, that to me was interesting. I mean, I'm a novelist. I was interested in the playing out of human drama, if you want it, in that way.
As a musician, Mo LAUDI, were you interested in the playing out of the drama?
Of course, there's so many different levels of it, how people react and how he plays with the media in the fall from grace, and him coming from a different society where he could be uniting people, but he's divisive, and also there's a lot of issues that I just felt, you know, if he owned up to what he done, he could have been a hero, but still he used this fear of the black intruder as a scapegoat, so that made a lot of people hate him. And
he didn't mention a black intruder.
No, he said he could have been an intruder. So, but
for you, that
immediately that's the subtext. Yes, from where I'm from and how these intruders have been treated. That's just basically a scapegoat that he used.
I completely agree with you. I mean, the piece I wrote about a year ago was who this person, this imaginary intruder, in quote marks, was behind the bathroom door. If you know what I mean. The
yes.
trope, in my view, that Pistorius drew on was the old idea of the zwart gevaar, which was the black danger, the sort of fear that was drummed up amongst white South Africans by themselves and by the apartheid government to justify all and any extent of human rights violations and violence, you know, from 1948 until 1990, when Mandela was released. So that fear, that sort of atavistic fear of an intruder, this lethal, and the lethal force that you have to meet an intrusion. Of course, the people you're accusing of being intruders are natives of their own land, you know, so it's very paradoxical. And that, to me, to my mind, very much that is the origin of the fear, the so-called fear that Pistorius laid claim to. And that, I was disappointed, was never examined in the trial and by the judge. I thought that was the opportunity to put that to bed and say, this, people in your gated communities, is no excuse to blast at anybody when you hear a noise in the night.
All right, so the subtext of race never fully addressed. A lot of reactions again coming in. Samuel saying, let him be behind bars so he can understand how to respect women. Pauline, ARRIGHI, we've talked about how this trial captivated South Africa, but it wasn't just South Africa. The whole world was captivated by this trial. Were you surprised at how much attention it got?
No, because this case is very typical of what happens when a man kills his girlfriend or wife. The empathy is focused on the murderer, and nobody acknowledged that it was domestic violence, that it was a specific crime against women, because when a man kills his woman with his wife or girlfriend, there are basically two main reasons for that: adultery or supposed adultery, and breaking up. It means that when a man thinks that his girlfriend or wife is escaping him, he kills her. He sees her as his property. And it has.
So for you, there's no doubt that his claim that he thought it was an intruder is false.
I won't focus on the case of Oscar Pistorius. I want to talk about femicide as a whole. Yeah. So there are two basic main reasons for men killing women, and it's not a matter of country or social class or race. It happens in every context. And it's a specific crime against women, which has something to do with the status of women in society. It's not a chance if 90% of victims of domestic violence are women. And it has something to do with whole society, as we consider women, relationship between men and women, and masculine domination. And when men can't stand that a woman doesn't belong to them, they kill them. And this crime, which is specific, has a name. It's called a feminicide. And we think it's very important that we acknowledge that killing a person for what he is or for what she is more serious than killing someone for money or for self-security.
And how's French law in that respect? Does French law...
No, in French law, you don't consider... we consider racist crime. We consider it's more serious to kill someone because he or she is black or because of his color, because of what he is.
Religion, yeah.
And it's fair that it's more serious that it should be an aggravated circumstances. And we don't consider killing of a woman for being a woman as an aggravated circumstances. And we should, because if we want to fight a phenomenon which is worldwide, which is the leading cause of the death of women under the age of 44 in the world, it's really huge. If you want to fight it, we have to acknowledge that it exists. It's the first step. So we have to acknowledge feminicide in the law. And we are launching a campaign with Oser le Féminisme in November to talk about it and to sensibilize people that we have to fight it, we have to acknowledge it in the law.
And put
we can prevent it. We can prevent it. And this is the most important. Because it's not just a new word for the pleasure of creating a new word. We can prevent it. Because as we saw in this case, when a man kills his wife or ex, he was violent before, always. There is always violence before a murder. So if we take it seriously when a man is violent towards a woman, then we can prevent many murders.
All right, so taking it more seriously, I know it's something we've talked about in the past, getting the police to take it more seriously, getting the courts to take it more seriously, and the families.
I just want to say you're absolutely right about the femicide. It's something I and other people in South Africa have written for and campaigned for, is that the way in which women are killed is very specific. I mean, South Africa, like everywhere, 85 or 90% of the killings of women are perpetrated by an intimate partner. I'm sure the statistics are exactly the same as in France. And the problem with one of the problems I had initially with the Pistorius trial and how it was presented, and it's a problem for femicide generally, is that the patterns in those kind of murders are not read by the police or by the courts. So each one is read as a unique case, as though this suddenly happened. Oh, and this suddenly happened. And this woman also suddenly got killed. How surprising, in her home by the man who's meant to love and look after her. In South Africa, what happened with this case, I think, is you had a merging of a pattern of what I would call domestic violence with this other pattern of claiming this fear, this sort of paranoid idea to defend yourself. It's very hard to judge, but one of the things that happens if you don't look at the patterned way in which women are killed, it's like a serial killer, but there's not one man who's killing. It's a society which preys on women in that very particular way, and that's the mindset that needs to shift, is that there's a pattern to the murders, a pattern in the behavior that leads up to the killing, and a pattern in how these men defend themselves as, oh, I couldn't think, oh, I was overwhelmed by anger, fear, jealousy, whatever they fill in.
That sheds light on, by the way, on the argument made, the contrary argument made by Guardian columnist Simon Jenkins, who writes, prison is for those who cannot stop themselves, but that's a tiny minority of prisoners. He believes that Pistorius should not go to jail. He points to the celebrity factor. In Britain, there's a tendency to lock away famous people just to make an example of them. South African justice has shown a sort of maturity. Fabian Hincker, do you take his point?
Well, I believe the interesting point is what Mrs. ARRIGHI said about what stands behind this case is the domestic violence and the violence against women. I don't think the problem of celebrity. This is not the problem of being a celebrity or not. It's the problem of domestic violence and violence against women and how we deal with it. It's still in progress worldwide. There is a global. People are thinking that it's not acceptable anymore. But once you have said that, how you deal with it? United Nations have taken some convention. European Council of Europe has taken some convention. You mentioned France earlier. We have a specific law from 2010 which prevents violence against women and psychological violence within a couple, domestic psychological violence, because often before having physical violence, you have psychological violence. And if you don't deal with it, it can end up very badly. So we are starting, the international institutions are implementing laws, rules, but it's a complicated problem because it used to be something private, something within the couple. So it's for improving this, the professional must have a good formation, the lawyer, the judge, the assistant, the social assistant, all the people to implement the law and to enforce this law. So the institutions are trying to deal with this problem, but it's still in progress, I believe, and it's still a very
still early days on that.
Exactly.
All right, now.
I think Mr. Jenkins, I read that piece in The Guardian, he clearly missed the point that Pistorius was convicted today of culpable homicide and for, in another case, a year or two prior to killing Reena Steenkamp for illegally or negligently discharging a firearm. So he was convicted of that. There were a number of other cases of negligence with guns, reckless driving, a whole lot of other things. But he was convicted on 2 offenses today, and 1 + 2, in my view, creates a pattern of carelessness and aggression, which definitely warranted at least the 5 years that he had.
And that argues to the point that Pauline ARRIGHI was making, that there's always a pattern, there are always signs that come before the killing of a woman. I want to talk before we go about the fact that he was an athlete. Now, over in the United States, it's coming to a head, the issue of athletes and domestic violence. This week comes news, Los Angeles Kings ice hockey defenseman Slava Voinov arrested on suspicion of domestic violence. It follows the indefinite suspension of Baltimore Ravens running back in the NFL, Ray Rice, for knocking unconscious his future wife at a New Jersey casino. Initially, he was hit with a 2-game ban, but a video, once it was released showing the incident, that was turned into an indefinite suspension. Now, since Rice was released, several other NFL players have been charged with domestic violence, including a star for the Minnesota Vikings, Adrian Peterson, accused of hitting his 4-year-old son with a tree branch. Let me ask you, Fabian Hincker, your thoughts on this issue about famous athletes and violence, domestic violence against women and children.
Well, you mentioned this case. It's interesting because we can see there is somehow a link also between sports and domestic violence. And the last case have emphasized the problem. I think it's important that the globalization, the mass media, internet now help people to realize this issue and to. The people do not accept this anymore, and thanks to the media, thanks to internet.
Why is there this violence linked to sports?
It's hard to say. There can be many factors. Domestic violence against women. It's not only with sportsmen, but specifically with sportsmen. In Pistorius' case, and mentioned he could have taken some. I don't know how you put it.
Boosters.
Exactly. So
he could have taken. Sorry.
Muscle boosters.
And it could somehow have become violent thanks to this. People, celebrities, sportsmen are put under lots of pressure, and they're used to have case with sportsmen and domestic violence. So the interesting things now is to realize how the teams react to this, and they are putting ban on these sportsmen and trying to stop this violence through.
Mo LAUDI, in South Africa, a strong jock culture.
Yeah, with the rugby and also with the whole sport and within the black community as well. There's this prevalence of men finding women as their property, and so like she mentioned before, once a woman threatens a man to leave, the only response a man would do would be, some cases, extreme cases, would be to fight aggressively, and domestic abuse is so much tolerated in a lot of families, which is a sad case. And so it's very important to raise the point that it's not acceptable.
Can I just put that the other way around with sportsmen? I've been the patron of rape crisis in South Africa for more than 10 years, and I can tell you that domestic violence, sexual abuse, femicide is perpetrated in every single profession across all classes. What we're seeing with these sportsmen, because they are highly visible, is these cases coming out in public. So I don't think sportsmen are any more or less inclined to kill their partners. I think what we're seeing is how prevalent it is, and the social shame, the inability to react and react responsibly and reasonably to what is gratuitous physical violence. If they'd hit men, they would just be up for assault. There would be no big fuss. There would be no big bother. What you have playing out in public is redefined sexual roles, redefined roles between men and women, and a refusal amongst women and increasingly amongst men to accept that kind of bullying patriarchy. So I would really be hesitant about saying sportsmen are more inclined to be killers. They are just the guys who are in the spotlight. And what we could do, what sportsmen could do, is say, look, there are lots of us who protect women. There are lots of us who don't beat up women. We will stand up and shun these men as judges who kill their wives, as street sweepers, and everything in between are doing the same thing. So I think that might be a more useful way of taking on this battle.
You think it's too much of an emphasis on the fact that he was this famous athlete who had, as Mo was describing, become a national icon in South Africa?
No, he was a very famous man. I mean, any person who has that sort of hyper fame, some people will think they're entitled to do anything. But I think that generally it doesn't explain the violence by saying, oh, he was a sportsman. There's so many sportsmen who are not violent towards their partners. Yes, it's enabled. It's a culture that enables it, but that is across the board. That's in any type of thing, in any group in community. I've never seen a difference between one particular employment group and another one.
All right.
So I think a more useful feminist argument is to say, this is now out in the open. You guys who don't beat up your partners and your wives, speak out, man up. Actually,
absolutely.
Absolutely.
In South Africa, I was just going to say, like, it's not just sport, it's not just music, it's in all fields where there's a strong culture of being possessive, on finding women as your belongings. I mean, you still have some culture where you can actually buy a woman by giving her cows and marrying so many different women. So a woman becomes your property. So that, in a way, must change within the culture.
The current president of South Africa, Jacob Zuma, he was cleared of rape allegations a while back, but he has...
Yes, that doesn't help matters at all.
He was cleared of rape charges. I have to just say the woman who accused him of rape and who took him to trial, she was vilified in public by his supporters, and he never once came out and spoke in her defense of her right to make that accusation, and that she shouldn't be accused of being a witch, or people calling to burn the bitch. That was many of the slogans. So,
and have attitudes on that score towards Jacob Zuma changed broadly in South Africa?
Oh, Jacob Zuma, we just wish he would stop upgrading his house at such massive expense. We're sick of doing his household accounts. We've got our own household accounts to do as well. And now we have to worry about 300 million he's overspent.
Okay. We're gonna leave it there. I want to thank you, Margie ORFORD, for joining us from Cape Town. I want to thank as well Mo LAUDI, Fabian Hincker. I also want to thank Pauline ARRIGHI. One final comment for you. This one from Mike on Facebook regarding Oscar Pistorius, saying, I think 5 years is okay for him. Stay with us because Media Watch is next.
Please play us that David Bowie song, 5 years.